very much to the organizers of LeBitConf for inviting me to give this talk. It's based on some research that I did for the Human Rights Foundation, and it also has applicability to my work with the project Sovereign. And the talk is Applications of Zero-Knowledge Proofs for Bitcoin. So first, some background information for those who are new to the concept of zero-knowledge proofs. Satoshi wrote in 2010 on the Bitcoin Talk forum that if a solution was found that is a way to integrate zero-knowledge proofs with Bitcoin, a much better, easier, more convenient implementation of Bitcoin would be possible. In the years since he wrote that, we have actually brought zero-knowledge proof systems up to the level of performance where we can actually integrate it with production cryptocurrencies, and we are seeing that indeed they do make better, easier, more convenient implementations of cryptocurrency possible. And I'll be exploring in this talk some of the ways that we could bring this technology to Bitcoin and realize Satoshi's vision here. So what is a zero-knowledge proof? So a zero-knowledge proof, as defined in the original paper that introduced the concept, is those proofs that contain no additional knowledge other than the correctness of the proposition in question. You might also hear this term being used colloquially as a synonym for a validity proof, which is a type of computational proof that may or may not be zero knowledge. So in some cases, the applications that I'll be discussing actually use validity proofs, not their zero knowledge variant, but a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. And so for the sake of including everything under the same term, zero knowledge proof, I'm just going to be using the term zero knowledge proof, or ZKP, throughout the talk. One thing that's important to know about a zero knowledge proof, and one of the things that makes them so powerful, is that while proving some computation can be very expensive and take a long time, verification is typically very fast and very cheap, like similar on the order of magnitude of like verifying a cryptographic signature. And so if you integrate zero knowledge proofs into a blockchain, it doesn't necessarily slow down the verification process. So an example of a zero knowledge proof. This is an example you might come across if you read like tutorials online. But it's a toy example. So like imagine that I had a really big piece of paper. That would be this big gray square here. And imagine I had a much smaller like Where's Waldo puzzle. And I wanted to prove to you that I knew where Waldo was without actually revealing where on the piece of paper Waldo actually is. This would be an example of a zero knowledge proof. Can I prove to you that I know where Waldo is without revealing anything else about the puzzle? And it turns out it's actually quite easy. What I do is I take the puzzle, I put it behind this giant piece of paper, and then I cut out a hole where Waldo's face is. Now I've proven to you that I know where Waldo is, but you don't know where on the piece of paper Waldo is because you don't know anything else about the puzzle. This is a very trivial example, but it kind of gives you an idea of what a zero knowledge proof actually is. So a more relevant example, because we're here, this is a Bitcoin conference. This is a screenshot from the Zcash block explorer. Zcash was the first cryptocurrency to implement ZK snarks in production. A ZK snark is a type of zero knowledge proof that stands for zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. It's a word, it's a mouthful, but that's what it is. And here on the block explorer, what you can see is something that's very different compared to a Bitcoin block explorer. On the sending side, you don't see anything except the number of notes that are being spent. You can't see the address that sent the transaction. You can't see the amount of the transaction. And over on the receiving side, you can see that they received two outputs, but you can't see how much was actually sent, and you can't see an address that received the transaction. That's because a zero-knowledge proof was used to actually encrypt all of those details, but still prove to the network that the transaction is valid. That is, that it wasn't double spent. The owner of the coins, the person sending the coins actually owns the coins, and it meets all of the other consensus rules of the protocol. So this is a practical example of a zero-knowledge proof in production in cryptocurrency. And so that brings us to my non-exhaustive list of applications of zero-knowledge proofs for Bitcoin. I only have about 30 minutes here, 25 minutes left. So this is definitely going to be a non-exhaustive list. People are coming up with new ways to use zero-knowledge proofs in Bitcoin every day. But this will, get your minds going, maybe spark some creativity for the devs and cryptographers in the room to think about ways that we can apply this technology to Bitcoin. So the first application to talk about is basically what I just showed a demonstration of. That is transaction data privacy and security. So we can use a zero-knowledge proof, as that screenshot just showed, to actually prove that a transaction is valid without revealing any, publicly revealing any details like the sender address, the recipient address, the amount that's being sent, even the asset that is being sent, or a memo field if you want to put some additional messages in the transaction. Basically, it's like TLS or PGP for money, if that metaphor means anything to you. So here's another screenshot of a block explorer from a blockchain called Aztec. And you can see in this block explorer screenshot, once again, there's no sender address, there's no recipient address, you can't see any amounts. It's just ciphertext with some proof data. It's quite amazing what we're able to do with this technology in the realm of transaction data, security, and privacy. It's already working in production now. Another use case, which was first discussed by Greg Maxwell, is zero-knowledge contingent payments. So the basic idea is that Alice can construct a Bitcoin transaction. You can actually do this with Bitcoin today. She can construct a transaction that pays Bob only if Bob provides a correct input to a program provided by Alice. So a trivial example, I wouldn't say trivial, but an example that Greg Maxwell actually came up with is like the solution to a Sudoku puzzle. So Bob is going to provide Alice a solution to a Sudoku puzzle. Neither of them trust each other though, so you want this to be like atomic. So what Bob does is Bob gives Alice his public key, a hash of the input for the program, basically a hash of the solution to the Sudoku puzzle, and a zero-knowledge proof that proves that the hash pre-image is a correct input for Alice's program. That is, that the solution to the Sudoku puzzle he has is actually correct. And now that Alice has been convinced that Bob actually knows the answer to her Sudoku puzzle, she's going to create a payment to Bob using a hash-locked transaction. Again, this is something you can do with Bitcoin today. And the hash that locks the transaction is the hash that Bob gave Alice. So now Bob can only claim the payment for his solution to the Sudoku puzzle if he publicly reveals that the pre-image of the hash that he gave Alice. That is, he has to publicly reveal the solution to the Sudoku puzzle in order to spend the Bitcoin and send it to his own address. And this is a way that Alice and Bob can trustlessly trade Bitcoin for a solution to a Sudoku puzzle, or a solution to many other kinds of computational problems. This is what an actual P2SH redeem script for this kind of transaction looks like. And this is the actual solution that was used in the example transaction that Greg Maxwell did with Sean Bowie back in 2016. Another example which Greg Maxwell talked about is what I'm calling ZK script. Basically a replacement for Bitcoin script that just uses a new like opzk verify type of opcode to validate that the rules of a transaction have been followed without actually putting those rules on chain. Like right now, when you spend a Bitcoin transaction, you have to reveal the entire redeem script, or at least now that we have Taproot, that branch of the redeem script on chain. Whereas with this kind of opcode, you just put a proof on chain and you're like, hey, there were some rules somewhere that encumbered these Bitcoins. I followed those rules. Here's a proof that I followed those rules. Let me spend the coins. So rather than embedding the redeem conditions directly in the blockchain, users just provide a zero-knowledge proof that the rules were followed. And with a general purpose verifier, programs could be arbitrarily complex. And there are actually proofs of concept out there of general purpose zero-knowledge proof systems like ZK Linux or ZK Wasm. And here's an example proof of concept that was just published a few weeks ago showing the Cartesi machine being used with risk 0 to emulate a Linux computer in zero knowledge. It's kind of mind-blowing. Another example, which is gaining more attention and prominence in the Bitcoin community and certainly in other cryptocurrency communities, are layer 2 validity rollups. So the basic idea with a layer 2 validity rollup is that users can deposit coins into a script address on Bitcoin layer 1 and receive an equivalent amount of coins in this rollup chain. So it's another blockchain that kind of like runs on top of Bitcoin. Then there's a block producer who will bundle user transactions together in a rollup block and then make a Bitcoin transaction that includes the rollup block data plus a zero-knowledge proof that proves the validity of the block. And layer 1 full nodes are actually going to verify that this zero-knowledge proof is correct, and they will only allow the rollup state to be updated if the rollup block data and a correct zero-knowledge proof is confirmed on Bitcoin layer 1. So some key features of a rollup chain compared to what you might hear of as like a side chain is that a layer 2 validity rollup comes with a trustless BTC bridge. That is, you can transfer BTC back and forth between the Bitcoin main chain and the rollup chain and then back to the main chain without actually giving up self-custody of your Bitcoin to any third parties, like a federation or a centralized custodian that you have to use today whenever you use a sidechain. Additionally, rollups built on Bitcoin have Bitcoin-grade double spend resistance, which means that it is just as difficult to double spend coins on a rollup as it is to double spend coins on Bitcoin layer 1. So some benefits or features that you might get out of a layer 2 validity rollup include that data can be compressed to fit up to 250,000 transactions per block. That's compared to about 3,000 or 4,000 transactions that you might see in a Bitcoin transaction today. New data privacy and security protocols can be implemented. For example, Zcash and Aztec, which I showed screenshots of earlier, could be implemented as rollups on top of Bitcoin, so you can get that strong level of privacy and data security guarantees for your Bitcoin transactions. Penumbra is another interesting model which uses end-to-end encryption to prevent minor extractable value for their decentralized exchange application. You could have new execution environments that support new programming languages and smart contracts such as Simplicity or Clarity, EVM, WASM, really any kind of execution environment that is compatible with the proof system that we ultimately want to implement on Bitcoin. We could have new types of layer 3s. Because we have new execution environments and new programming languages, we might have new capabilities for building new kinds of smart contracts and new layer 3 systems, such as ARC, optimistic rollups, or generalized state channels. And we could have trust minimized bridges with independent chains. For example, there's a protocol called ZK Bridge that connects different independent blockchains using zero-knowledge proofs. This is a basic diagram of how the rollup actually works. Again, you've got Bitcoin at the bottom there as the base layer. You've got the rollup blockchain kind of built on top. You've got this bridge here that connects BTC, the asset, to the rollup chain so that you can do deposits and withdrawals of BTC. You have a developer interface. This could be a user interface. It could be a CLI, anything that can send transactions to the rollup blockchain. The rollup block producer is going to produce rollup blocks and then send it to this roll over here that's called a prover, which is running the actual zero-knowledge proof proving software. And they're going to use the rules of the rollup chain along with the proof generation software to generate a zero-knowledge proof that proves that the rollup block is actually valid, and then finally the rollup block data plus the zero-knowledge proof is going to get confirmed on Bitcoin. And once it's confirmed on Bitcoin, it has the full confirmation strength of any other Bitcoin confirmation. You have to reorganize Bitcoin in order to reorganize this rollup block. So that's a very high level of security, arguably the highest level of security that you could get for any kind of transaction. There's also a variant of rollups called a Validia, what I'm calling a Validia chain, which has the same features as a validity rollup, except that instead of storing the block data inside of Bitcoin blocks, which is of course expensive and limited by the Bitcoin block size limit, instead a Validia chain will store the block data somewhere else with some centralized or federated or decentralized data custodian. And there are many different variants of this model that people have come up with. I won't go into all of them because we don't have enough time, but you can look up these terms online if you want to learn about these different off-chain, so-called off-chain data availability protocols. There's also a variant of rollup called a sovereign rollup, which you'll probably be hearing more about, because a sovereign rollup is something that you can actually build today. We don't have the opcodes necessary to build a layer 2 validity rollup on Bitcoin today, but we do have the capabilities of building a sovereign validity rollup. So this is a separate blockchain that stores its block data inside of Bitcoin blocks along with a zero-knowledge proof. And then rollup-like clients can use the zero-knowledge proof to trustlessly sync with the blockchain. So instead of having to run a full node and re-execute all of the transactions of the rollup themselves, instead they just download a proof and they know that they're on the right chain and trustlessly sync their balances. Just like a layer 2 validity rollup, it has Bitcoin grade double spend resistance, but unlike a layer 2 validity rollup, there's no trustless BTC bridge because Bitcoin main chain doesn't have the capability of verifying withdrawal transactions. So if this is kind of like a simple illustration of what a layer 2 validity rollup looks like, you've got the trustless BTC bridge, and then the rollup is putting data as well as a zero-knowledge proof into the Bitcoin block. A sovereign rollup looks like this. There's no native trustless BTC bridge, but it still puts the block data and a zero-knowledge proof into a Bitcoin block. And every block has to build on the last canonical chain tip block, just like a layer 2 validity rollup. So the next application is a chain state proof. And with a chain state proof, you can fully verify the blockchain using a single zero-knowledge proof. Some use cases of this include a fast initial sync. So instead of having to download, let's say, Bitcoin Core and wait for many hours, potentially days, depending on your internet connection and computing hardware, to download and verify the full Bitcoin blockchain. Instead, you just download a zero-knowledge proof, which proves, hey, the entire chain up until this point in time is valid, and then you can, continue syncing the blockchain from there. Another use case would be validating light clients. So, like, imagine you had a mobile wallet that could, stay in sync with the Bitcoin network, and you didn't have to trust any third parties to tell you what your wallet balance is. You just download these zero-knowledge proofs, which are like a few megabytes in size, and you're synced. You don't have to download like block headers or blocks and verify all of the individual transactions. You just download these proofs, and you can stay in sync. You could have better Lightning privacy. So like today, in order for Lightning to work, at least in the trust minimized way that it does, Lightning nodes have to announce their UTXOs to their peers so that they know like how much money they have. Whereas they could just provide a zero-knowledge proof that proves, like, as of this block height, this is how much money I have, but I'm not going to show you exactly which UTXOs are mine. That's something that is possible with this technology. And additionally, you could have better bridge security. So this doesn't give us like trustless BTC bridges, but it does mean that the bridges that exist no longer have to either have the chain like fully synchronize on Bitcoin or run trust miners like SPV like clients. Instead, you could have essentially full node level of security, but with much less data using these zero-knowledge proofs. And so an example implementation of these chain state proofs would be ZeroSync. Right now, they only do the header chain state, but they're working towards a full chain state proof. And they actually have their header chain state proof working in the browser. You click a button, and a few seconds later, you're synced up with the network. It's pretty magical. Shout out to the ZeroSync team for achieving this. Something else that the ZeroSync team actually invented is this protocol called ZK coins. And so the basic idea is that Alice can send Bob a payment by sending Bob the transaction data and a zero-knowledge proof that the transaction is actually valid off-chain. And then Bob will verify that the ZKP is valid, which convinces Bob to accept the money and then hand over whatever it is that he's selling to Alice. And then Alice only needs to put a commitment to her payment on-chain. She doesn't have to put the transaction data and the zero-knowledge proof on-chain. She only puts a commitment, which is like a small string of data, just a few bytes. And finally, a cryptographic accumulator can be used to put a hard cap on the amount of data that users must store. So instead of having to keep track of the entire history of these commitments that get put on chain, they only have to store a month's worth of commitments on chain that are stored on chain. So what does ZK Coins give us? Well, it gives us 15 times more throughput compared to normal on-chain Bitcoin transactions. It could give us end-to-end encrypted privacy and security for payments. So basically the same level of privacy that you get with those Zcash and Aztec transactions that I showed you earlier. And only one-way interactivity is required, compared to Lightning, which requires two-way interactivity. Basically, Alice can send Bob a payment even if he's offline, as long as she has somewhere where she can send that transaction data and the zero-knowledge proof, and then Bob can download it when he comes back online. So maybe she puts it in his email inbox, or maybe she puts it in a cloud storage drive and sends him the link, however the application is built. But Bob doesn't necessarily need to be online at the same time as Alice, whereas like with Lightning, both parties need to be online. So this is a diagram of how the ZK Coins protocol actually works and puts data on chain. I won't explain everything that's happening here, but if you want to take a picture of it and look at it later, or just read the Zero Sync white paper, it's all explained in there. And then the last example that I'll talk about is BitVM, which is something that's been a hot topic in Bitcoin land recently. So at a high level, BitVM enables users to make BTC spendable based on the result of any arbitrarily complex off-chain program. I won't explain in detail how that works, but if you're interested, I recommend reading the BitVM white paper. It's very interesting. So if one of the parties attempts to spend the coins with an invalid result of the program, then the other party can stop them and even punish them using an on-chain fault proof. This is kind of similar to Lightning, where if you try to close a channel with an invalid state, your counterparty can go on-chain and slash you using like the justice transaction. And then zero-knowledge proofs can be used with BitVM to succinctly prove computational correctness to BitVM contracts. So instead of both parties having to rerun all of the computation themselves to verify that the computation is correct, you can just give your counterparty a zero-knowledge proof, and they can verify that very quickly, very cheaply. So the main limitation with BitVM today, because it sounds amazing, it's like, we can do like Turing-complete smart contracts, and why do we need altcoins and blah, blah, blah. Well, there are some caveats. One of them is that it's currently limited to two-party contracts, a quote-unquote prover and a verifier. But currently research is being done to find out, can we actually decentralize this, the prover role to some degree, or maybe federate the prover role such that only 1 out of n provers are needed to cooperate for the BTC to be spendable. Because right now, if the prover is uncooperative, then the protocol doesn't really work. But if you can get the multiple provers and only have to have one of them cooperate, then that's kind of a better security model. So that's all the examples I wanted to cover today. I'm happy to take any questions if we got time for some questions. Thank you.
Hey, hello? Oh, yes. You mentioned BitVM, and yes, we're all kind of excited about that, though there are limitations. I'm curious on all your work on the validity rollups. How do you think that can unlock? Because I know that you still need some opcodes for that to work, and we all look forward for that to happen at some point. But can that be sort of a hack to sort of start playing around with that, and so then community sort of accepts it, and then one day we get the opcode for all your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned the application sovereign rollups. So it's already possible to build a rollup to Bitcoin. The one thing that's missing is the trustless BTC bridge. And BitVM can't give us a trustless BTC bridge. But what it could potentially do, if that research direction that I mentioned works out, is give us a bridge, a federated bridge, where you only need one honest federator in order to ensure that the bridge continues to work. Like right now, with bridges that you build to other Bitcoin blockchains, for example, the rootstock bridge, it's a federated bridge, and you need 5 out of 9 federators to cooperate in order for the bridge to keep working, and for the Bitcoin to not be compromised. But with BitVM, if that research direction ends up working out, we could actually have a bridge where only 1 out of 9 federators, or 1 out of 20, or 1 out of 100, however big you want your federation to be, to actually be honest and cooperative in order for the bridge to keep working. And that, I think is a huge improvement in the security model. So it doesn't get us to the full, trustless, holy grail level of security that proper layer 2 rollups have, but it gets us like much closer than where we are today. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thanks. We got time for a few questions more. Anybody?
Hey, very interesting. Well, you didn't mention MPC as some additional potential solution to some of the problems you were talking about. Just the latest thing that you mentioned, the possibility of coordinating this base trust level among a federation, I think could be solved with MPC, right?
How do you think it could be solved with MPC?
Well, you can validate the execution of the signing of transactions by validating the state machine on using secure multi-party computation. So, you can have n minus one security on using any of the MPC protocols.
I haven't looked into that particular security model. I'd be interested in maybe connecting offline and learning more about that.
Sure. I'll be willing to do that, of course.
Thank you.
¿Alguien? ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Okay, so that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.